report is the declarations are pretty much up to date, but has anything happened since this report was published? Did any board member wishes to draw attention to? Anybody taking on any new jobs or giving jobs up?
Nicola, just a quick one from me. Sorry, John Latham. My daughter is working for a partner organisation in a project. So it's a partner organisation called FEST in a project called Nursing Now that I believe HEE has now put some funding into. So.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, John. Sound is a bit ropey, I think. I don't know whether it's just at one end. Is everybody hearing me okay? Yeah, okay. All right, let's just see. It might be open microphones and that kind of thing. Liz Mear has her hand up, but then I think Andrew George was signalling. So Liz, please.
Yeah, so I've just been appointed as a governor for Leeds City College that has sort of T levels feeding into health and social care. So I think that needs to be recorded, but it's just recent, just last week.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Liz. Andrew?
I have some minor tidying up, which I sent Nicola, but none of it's germane to HEE. It's resignations and things as of time. So I sent them to Nicola. So.
Okay. Well, thank you all for that. I think it is important that where we take on these roles, or sadly for families, where families do, that we should actually just mention them in the way that John has done as well. So thank you for that. So if that's the declarations of interest, then if we could go on to item 3, which is the minutes of our meeting on the 15th of December. I'll take them as a whole rather than go through page by page. Are we content with the accuracy of the minutes as drafted? Signal if you wish to raise any comments on accuracy. No, okay, so if we, Andrew, you're on mute, Andrew. The first of the day.
First of the day. Just to show in my section on page 16 of the overall pages, I think stringer means should be stronger on line 5. So okay. just to show I was awake when I read them.
It's amazing, isn't it? You can read these things. I've read them, and I promise, and I didn't spot it at all. But anybody who taught me English at school wouldn't be surprised that I can't spell. Right. If they're the only issues of accuracy, are there any matters arising that anybody wishes to raise which are not on our agenda today? No, are we content? So if we could accept those as a record of the meeting, Nicola, and they can stand approved. So the next item is item 4, which is an update to our standing orders. Who's briefly going to mention this? Is this sits with you, Lee, does it? Or does it sit with me or you, Nicola?
You can do that if you like, Chair. Our standing orders require that appointments to our committees come to the board for approval. Just before Christmas, Sir David spoke with Soraya about the vacant post that we have as chair of our remuneration committee. This paper presents Sir David's recommendation to you that we approve Soraya as chair of that committee.
Everybody's nodding, Soraya, so that's approved. So Soraya, thank you for agreeing to take that on. It is a committee which all non-executive directors are members of, but it's very, very positive that you've taken on that responsibility. We're very grateful, Soraya, and I know you've done that in other boards as well, so you can bring that experience to the work. So that's terrific. So thank you for that. Thanks, Nicola. Committee chairs updates. The only committee that we've had since our last meeting in December is the Patient Advisory Forum, but I think you're just in the process of changing the name of it, Liz. So over to you anyway for an update.
Yeah, thanks to David, and thanks for attending the committee as well. So we've been for a couple of meetings, we've been sort of looking at the chair role, having a co-chair who was one of the group members and changing the title. So we've got agreement to the People's Advisory Committee, and that reflects that people around the table. They're not just patients, they're carers, and a whole range of people we have around the table. So we've agreed the co-chair that we'll go ahead with that. So we're just putting a process together to ask people to nominate or to nominate other people if they haven't got the confidence. And then we'll have the committee members will vote on who will be the co-chair. So it's like a peer selection. And then twice a year we will come to the board to update on the progress of the committee. So our last meeting last week, we people on the committee sit on various Health Education England groups, and we talked about the role on the Digital Health Literacy Group, Patient Safety Board, Future Nurse, Future Midwife Strategic Assurance Board, Medical Associate Professions Oversight Board, Medical Education and Training Forum, and the People Plan for Allied Health Professionals Strategic Oversight Forum. So lots going on. Members fed back on what was happening in those groups, what comments they'd made, how that have influenced HEE business. So that took up most of the time. And really interesting, some concerns from members because they're not sitting on the number of groups they normally would, but we explained that that's just because of the situation we're in at the moment with COVID, and real appetite actually to make a difference from that group by giving the people's voice to those committees. And I think the members do feel like they are making a difference. So a positive meeting. It's a very sparky group. We've got some committee development on the 3rd of March with Eden. We're doing a similar exercise that we did with the board, so we get to know each other because we've got some new members around the table. So I think that's basically it, Sir David, where we got to last week.
No, very good, Liz, and a real sense, a real reminder actually for me, not having attended that meeting for a while, of just where the tentacles of all those individuals go into the various groups, and how that involvement is not just about the committee that you chair and will co-chair, but is really about those working groups where people are present, and that voice of people using services is much more distributed. It's not concentrated just in that group. So it was a good reminder actually, and the fact that they'll come a couple of times a year to this board and actually have some conversation with us, I think will help us all get a sense of that from listening to the points that you and colleagues raised. So no, it's very good in terms of its value adding contribution to the work of HEE. So yeah, thanks for everything that you've done to.
I'll feed that back to the group. They'll be pleased to hear that. I'll feed that back. Thank you.
No, thanks, Liz. Any questions to Liz on that? Are we content with that? Soraya. Second time this morning, you're on mute as well. Happens to me as well. So go on.
Started really badly today. Liz, sorry, just a quick question around the balance around geography, the balance around age, and the balance around ethnicity. Is it a pretty? I mean, I haven't seen the membership, but are there any areas where some of us might be able to help and encourage people to join? And if people are interested, how do they actually put themselves forward?
So that's a good question, Sarah. So over the last year, there's the team sort of in HEE who support the group have worked really hard to make sure that we have got a balance in terms of geography, age, different backgrounds and ethnicity on the group. So that is quite good actually. We have got a balance, but at the moment there are only 12 people on the group because we've just had we've had quite a few people, like 8 or 9 people have come to the end of their term on the group, and we've decided that we'll hold recruitment until we're through some of the COVID period, and then we will have a period of recruitment to make, and we will be looking at that to get a balance. So when that starts happening, I'll come back to this board, because if we've got people we think would be great on the board, on the committee, that would be really good. And part of the work with Eden will be to look at the background of the people we've got, look at their skills and experiences, and then think about how we can better serve HE through which groups those people sit on. So we'd want to do that as well for the new members, really understand the experience and skills, so we can make sure that we match those skills with what we need to do as HE. So yeah, we'll come back to you on that. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Liz, thanks for everything that you're doing to take that work forward. So the next item, if we can move on, is item 7. And Navina, this is your update, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by thanking everybody. The end of 2020 and the start of 2021 was extremely busy and stressful for service, for our population and for our colleagues here at HEE. We had to really work across the holidays, and a lot of people, like across the NHS, had to continue working and didn't really get that much of a break. But really to respond to the sort of critical situation with the pandemic and moving into level 5. And we'll hear a bit more about the work that we're doing as we progress. So I really wanted to acknowledge that. That our colleagues at HEE have had to work really hard to balance the sort of 3 areas for us. One being what the service needs, because we are here to serve the people through the service, but balancing that with making sure we can continue to look after our trainees and learners, because they were called upon to support service. And the third area is still holding on to the impact that will have on the future workforce and future planning. So we're continuously having to sort of make sure that we keep an eye on all 3 areas. I do want to take this opportunity to say a really humble and heartfelt thank you to all our students, trainees and staff who actually are making a lot of personal and professional contributions to patients and to the population. And there's some lovely moments to observe, like all the wonderful communications about the vaccinations and the joy that that's bringing to so many people. So I just wanted to note that. I'd like to move on now to our review on where we are with our spending review update. We've been working together, HEE team, with our NHS EI and the department partners to really clarify the detail of what we will do in this year's single year spending round, take into account the fact that we've got the pandemic and there's a bit of uncertainty and we have to factor that into our discussions. So I'm pleased to report that actually the discussions are really going, we think, very well. We are making sure that we're very close to what service needs, especially around long-term plan commitments and COVID-related changes that have to be made. So we're still yet to finalise the kind of actual final detail, we plan that we should be able to bring it to the next board meeting with a formal business plan. This will inform the next paper that we're going to be talking about later around how we're doing business planning this year. It's different, it's tighter, and we've got to have a little bit more flex in it. I'd like to also note that attached to my report is the response to the consultation for the integrated care system that we submitted, and we really wanted to make sure that HEE was able to offer support to integrated care systems, and this will also inform how we think about how we do our business and how we organise ourselves to make sure we properly complement what the integrated care systems need. We've also, as the board knows, we have had to think about student deployment and engage with the Nursing Midwifery Council and with our partners in service and the department really in the last week, and we have kept the board abreast of those changes and progress at separate briefings, but we will be talking a little bit more detail in a paper further along in today's board, so I won't say much more about that. I'd like to move on now to the pulse survey that we did with our HEE partners and stakeholders. We chose to do a pulse survey this year rather than a full stakeholder survey because of the pandemic and its implications. And so we met and interviewed 24 partners whom we work with, and we're using some of that information together with the rest of the information that we have on regular feedback and that we learn about our work. I have in the paper outlined the areas that of change, some improvement, some areas that we need to focus on further between what the stakeholders told us in 2019 and their feedback this year. And the main areas were around improving engagement, clarity and consistency around what we do, and our organisational behaviours. So nothing really surprising there, and also quite, you know, in line with the work that we are doing as an organisation. I found some of the feedback quite helpful and positive and encouraging, and there was also some quite challenging feedback, which I think is really helpful as well. So we've decided that we needed to work on some key areas in response to the survey, and we want to make sure that we keep the board and our partners up to date on what we're doing and what progress we're making. So just to give you the headlines, we want to further strengthen HEE's working relationships and engagement with our stakeholders, and we want to keep a continuous review on their feedback of how we're doing with that. Further clarification of our role in promoting our success and the value of the work that we do, and people felt that that would really be helpful in sort of busting some myths, but also in helping move things on, especially as we're moving into the sort of next phase of where the NHS has got to be thinking. We really feel that people have asked us to step up a bit more in our convening role, and that again is in line with some of our plans, so that's what we'll be focusing on. There is a real appetite for transforming and reforming education and training, there's no question about that. And then a really big push on improving our regional links and relationships. And again, this is in line with what we're doing, we have been doing this past year, what we continue to do, and also what the ICS consultation is about as well. So that's all the work that we think that, well, it's quite a lot of work, but as I said, it's in line with our plans anyway. So quite pleased with that feedback. The board will note that this survey does not give direct feedback from trainees and students, so that is being done separately, and Harpreet has kindly agreed to work with Simon Gregory to do a focused piece of work on what our trainees and students are feeling at the moment and with the feedback from them. And I think that's particularly important, bearing in mind the context of this last year and next year, and for how we plan for the future. There is one area that we will focus a bit more on today, and actually probably put some greater emphasis for our next board meeting, which is the impact on postgraduate medical dental education recruitment. So this is an area which Wendy and the team are looking into, and we are trying to work out the impact, the flexibility around the country, the variation, and work with our partners in colleges, the GMC and others, to have to kind of work out the implications for training extensions, any risks associated with the extensions. So it's quite a major piece of work, but we will definitely keep it on the board's agenda. Probably next month we'll bring a bit more detail. I'll stop there and take questions or field them for my colleagues.
Thank you, Navina. It's good to see that. And I personally did some of the interviews with stakeholders as part of the Pulse survey, and they were genuinely fascinating. And that sense of movement and progress that has been Navina drew out, particularly over the past 12 months, was certainly a very present feature of the comments of the interviews that I did with some of the national leaders. Very important work. But John Latham, you should, and then I'll come to you, Soraya. John, please.
Yeah, it's just on sort of mechanisms that we have within the organisation for both stakeholder, if you like, student feedback and staff feedback. I'm only picking up for the next meeting that we go into on the Good Governance Institute. We've got Good Governance doing a piece of work, identical piece of work for us at the moment, actually. And I think it's important that we do understand, and everybody understands, how we get feedback through to ourselves from both the stakeholders, including students, and staff. And just having that very clearly articulated, I think, is something that would be a very positive thing.
Okay, Soraya.
Thank you, Sir David. Navina, thank you. One of the things I think that we've obviously not been able to do as non-execs is to link with some of the regions and the regional deans. And I just wondered whether some thought could be given how that could happen going forward. And I think perhaps more particularly linking through an ICS, because I think that's going to be the most useful area for non-execs to actually just look at how the conversations are going, etc., without it being burdensome. So could I just ask you to perhaps give that some thought? Certainly, I'm sure, hopefully my other colleagues would be quite happy to do so. But I think it's something we should pick up as part of the process going forward.
Do you want to come back, Navina? And I wonder whether David Farrelly might say something about the conversation we had, was it this week or last week, about non-executive directors linking to the regions, which might pick up on that latter point. We need to extend it to ICSs, I think, Soraya, but that might be a way of just breaking this down into bite-sized chunks, so we've got that greater familiarity with what's going on without everybody being swamped in the detail of what's going on nationally. But Navina, do you want to come back on John or Soraya?
Yeah, just to say that John's absolutely right. We actually do have a rich variety, different sources of feedback and understanding of people's experience. So, and you're right, we could look at how we make that much more sort of open and transparent, and for people to see. I'm really keen that we also demonstrate what we have done in response to the feedback, and then even if whatever we've done hasn't worked so well, it's important to share that. So definitely take that point. Shall I let David talk about the work with the non-execs and regions?
Yeah, certainly. So we've been working with the regional directors to understand the best fit of which non-execs to match with them. So we've shared your profiles. We've looked at their work and who chairs which committee and gone through a sort of matching process. We're due over the next day or so just to send you all a note to say this is the proposition for you. And if you're happy with that proposition, then we'll formalise that, because we want to be clear on what the role will be, rather than just a buddying that it is around. There are some wicked issues that they want some wisdom to help them unpick. There's some navigation in terms of if you're seeing similar issues elsewhere that you could direct them to, etc. So we're just pulling together a little profile to say this is the sort of nature of the activities we'd like you to do in support of regional directors, and if the people match your what you wish to do as well, then we can get that going in next week or so.
Thank you.
Okay, but I think that will really make a difference in some respects. We'll have to work out who to send to Coventry, but after we've done that, it should be okay.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, I'd like to thank Kelly, who I think is on the call. I think I saw her on the call. Wendy's flagging. Well, let me just finish my sentence, if I may, Wendy, just to thank Kelly, who's drawn all this work together, working with Giles Denham to make this pulse survey happen, and all the recordings were written up and drawn together by Kelly, and I think the report that you've got was taken forward by her. So Kelly, thank you for everything that you've done to make this happen. I can't emphasize too highly just how important it is that we're connected to our stakeholders, both nationally, regionally and locally, and responding to their needs. As a body concerned with training and education, we must be connected to those people who are employing the staff, as well as the people experiencing the training as well. So these points of how we get the feedback in real time and use this to design and develop our work is hugely important. Wendy, last word to you on this.
Thanks, David. Just to update the Neds on hot off the press, we've just had the analysis of the National Education and Training Survey, which, as you know, we agreed that we would run it despite COVID. So we ran it between November the 3rd until December the 7th. So an interesting time. This goes out to all undergraduates on clinical placements, so all professions and all postgraduate doctors. And we had a 20% increase in response rate from 2019. The only groups that went down in percentage response were the postgraduate medics, unsurprisingly, and science and therapeutic students, which is a tiny reduction. But response rates from nursing, midwifery, AHP, healthcare assistant students all increased, which I think shows that people do want to engage. And there's just a few headlines. So 86% of the learners positively rated their clinical placement and their experience over the last year, which is a really interesting dynamic. And if you remember, I shared with you the deep dive on quality that we did with a smaller group, where we looked in detail at their experiences of COVID and redeployment, and this would seem to support that on a broader brush. So we're putting that into a slightly more user-friendly document, which, with your permission, Sir David, I think will simply circulate to the board so that you've got a chance to look at it in your own time. But this is beginning to be a really useful piece of work. And of course, the big change has been the masses of support now from the Council of Deans and HEI colleagues, who now want to see this as part of their own assurance processes. So this is the sort of national look. And I think it supports the sort of individual deep dives that we've done, if you like, the just-in-time spot check surveys that Mark did, I did throughout the COVID time. And we are trying to make sure that we knit those findings together. But I'm very pleased that the quality team just got on and did this, because I think it gives us an annual baseline. We obviously want to get better in terms of response rates, but it's incredibly helpful, and it can be broken down regionally. It can be broken down very locally in any way you like. But I will circulate the headline graphs around in due course, if that's all right, Sir David.
Well, I think we should bring it to the board as well as circulate it so people can look in the ledger. I think it'd be worth bringing it to a public board meeting, and then that's another way of actually just publicising the feedback and making it available to a wider audience as well as the individual board members. But I'm with you, Wendy. I think it's hugely important that we do this, and it's really good. And it sounds like some pretty impressive results buried in there. I'm sure there's one or two challenges as well, but it's good to get that positivity. Andrew George, please.
So this is all very positive and exciting to hear. I guess my question is, if we think about our stakeholders, are we asking what you might call the middle level of people? I'm thinking of hospital consultants and things like that, because it seems to me that we look after our trainees, we engage in the organisations, where a lot of frustration might be wrongly placed. Is perhaps from consultants who see juniors who oh, HEE have told us this, HEE have done this, and are ascribing things to us that maybe shouldn't be ascribed to us. How do we have our finger on the pulse of whether our messages are getting through to that level and the equivalent in the nursing and primary care and so on and so forth parts of it?
Good question. Anybody want to come back on that? Wendy?
I can't type quickly enough. I was going to put it in the chat line. There is a trainers survey that the GMC run across the 4 countries that we have massive input to, Andrew. I have to say it's not been hugely, there's not been a hugely high response rate to it. It's only run, well, twice, but it is a starting point for trainers. I think in terms of our feedback, we do that through our schools. In postgraduate medicine very effectively, because of course they bring together everybody from educational and clinical supervisors, i.e. the day-to-day jobbing consultant, through to the training program directors and the leaders of that particular specialty. So that's how I think we get the sort of if you like, the sense check of morale and impact of changes at that level. But of course, we also have enormous and detailed links with Royal Colleges, so we get a number of different triangulated views. And we share those views increasingly well across the 4 country organisations like HEE that deliver commissioning or education training. So I think we've got a fairly good view of that. I think it is a bit of a holy grail, the sort of middle-aged consultant view. It is something that people do struggle with, to be frank. And that's why I think the contacts that I've built up with Chan Nagpal are really helpful, because we have a very free-flowing discussion with senior BMA leaders as well, which again gives us another flavour. So I think there's no, we have chosen not to do a trainer survey for a number of reasons, which I'm happy to go into in detail at some stage. We want to put our energy into making sure that undergraduates and those in our funded postgraduate training have a wider voice than just their individual professional specialty feedback.
I wonder, Wendy, Navina, whether we might take a general report on feedback from key stakeholders. If it just reminds colleagues that the chat box works for those of us that are on the call. It doesn't work if you're a member of the public joining the meeting. It's not on their record, so to speak. So I think if we want our conversations to inform wider discussions coming from this meeting, we need to take it out of the chat box and into the oral record of the meeting. And I don't say that to be critical of anybody, but I think there are some important points being landed in the chat box that I think wider participants in the meeting might be interested in. So I think Joe Lenihan put something in about mapping the various sources of feedback that we get. Wendy, you then echoed that and said some of the ones that exist for medicine. And I think just bringing a map which shows those various sources across all the professions of feedback might pick up on Andrew's point about where do we have regular and consistent and strong feedback, and are there any gaps anywhere? And then your point, Wendy, about how some of the other stakeholder relationships are a balance to some of those meeting feedback sources, which means we capture some of that voice in a slightly different way than survey, but nevertheless in quite important ways. Your comments about the BMA, for instance, I think are hugely important. So I wonder whether we might bring something to a meeting later in the spring, which just maps those various sources of feedback, so we can show this isn't an ad hoc approach that exists across this organisation, but there is quite a fabric of feedback that is woven by these various strands and various ways that we actually collect the intelligence and begin to draw it together. I think there's somebody else asking to come in. Let me just check. Yeah, Giles, that was right.
David, just as a quick observation, the other option we have is to, if we do run a further quantitative online survey, as we did as part of the first stakeholder survey, to look at who we include in that, because last time round we went to well over 1,000 different people, and it's fairly easy to do. Obviously, you have to think about the questions and their suitability for the audience you're asking, but that is one other route we could follow to test any constituencies we don't think that we've captured completely already.
No, very good, Giles. And maybe what we need at the board is a map and a plan for how we intend to take feedback over the next 12, 18, 24 months or something. You know, the evidence appears to be that rather than these big set pieces, that more regular pulse surveys, which are more targeted, are proving to be effective across many sectors and industries as well. I'm not an expert in this, but just listening to some of the organisations that conduct these surveys, it would appear that this balance between larger surveys and pulse surveys is something to think about. But let's not try and have that. Let me not try and have that conversation now, and I'll leave you, Giles, with other colleagues to work out how to take this forward. The big thank you for the work, and thanks for drawing it out so clearly, Naveen, in your report, and the report that's attached as an annex to your report as well. Are we content to move on, colleagues? So if we could, Lee, if I could invite you to just lead us through this item on the best place to work, and I think this is an oral update that you're going to provide for us.
It is. Thank you, David. Hopefully I'll spend about 5 minutes talking about where we are on this, and then we can have some questions. So it's a year now since the board agreed that HEE becoming the best place to work was a key priority. And so what we've done since then is we've engaged colleagues through 2 We Are HEE online workshops that allowed us to find out what exactly being the best place to work meant in terms of colleagues' views and what we needed to do differently to make it happen. Those 2 workshops were boiled down by our independent collaborators, collaborated together into a report that delivered 46 recommendations that we've now translated into 50 projects. We reported to you in October where we've got to. Best Place to Work draws colleagues from across HEE to try and make ourselves collectively the best place to work, which is why we very much talk about we said we did rather than you said we did, because collectively as a group of people who work in HEE, we came up with the ideas and now collectively we're delivering them. In the October report, I talked to you about things like the Freedom to Speak Up Guardians that are now regional, the hugely improved work we put into the flu campaign this year and the delivery of that, new virtual corporate inductions, and also our highest ever apprenticeship and graduate numbers, as well as the creation of the operational delivery group that David Farrelly chairs, trying to bring together regional and national colleagues. What I want to talk to you about this time is a few other things we're currently doing and a few things we're about to do. All of this, as you know, will be discussed by the People Committee in far more detail over the coming weeks and months, but I just want to give you a flavour of where we are. So in our first of the 6 domains we work on, culture and leadership, obviously we talked about it earlier and Sir David mentioned it. We've got a session on board development after this session. We're also doing executive team development and working far closer with the staff networks. Our staff recognition awards are now a really regular basis in which we reward staff and staff nominate each other, and we sent out thank you cards using one of our health careers Step Up to Schools nominations to all staff just before Christmas. On increasing diversity at a senior level, we've done lots of work around promoting those roles at 8B and above through social media. And between April and December of last year, we appointed 22 new colleagues from BAME backgrounds into senior jobs in HEE, both internally and externally. Our management development programme is about to go into its 2nd tranche of people, and then over the next couple of years, all managers in HEE will have the opportunity to be part of that programme. The Ideas Lab is being developed from the ground up, so Nick is leading that bit of work and has had meetings across the organisation with people about how that would work, how people want to get engaged with it. David talked about pulse surveys. We literally just did one last week with all our staff on our all-staff webinar, and over 500 people came back to us with their current positioning on how they're feeling about the world, how they're feeling about the pandemic, and how they're feeling about the way we are working, and we're taking those results forward. What are we working on at the moment? What's coming up next? So yesterday we launched the We Are HEE workshop on values and behaviours. I can tell you that as of this morning, and this is since 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon, there are 55 ideas on there, 109 comments and over 850 votes. So people are already engaging in that workshop as we co-create our values and behaviours framework, and colleagues on this board have the opportunity to go and engage in that as well through your own personal sign-on details. We also have our annual staff survey kicking off in April, which will become annual now rather than biannual as it used to be. reverse mentoring pilot was discussed last week at our staff webinar. Again, that people wishing to partake of that have been given the opportunity to put themselves forward. And we've got loads more going on across a whole range of issues. And I think the challenge for us is to deliver each and every one of those individual bits of work, but at the same time, make sure it adds up to a sum that's greater than some of its parts, that the best place to work, all those bits click together to actually make HE feel like the best place to work. I hope that was a helpful, quick whiz through where we are. I'd like to thank Lisa, Wilson and other colleagues for doing huge amounts of work to make this happen. And I'm happy, as I say, to take part in the discussion, David, but recognise that the People Committee will be spending a lot of time on this over the coming weeks.
Thank you, Lee, and really helpful to see such a concentrated report with the developments and initiatives that are taking place. As you said, I think the People Committee are going to pick this up at their next meeting, and that will then come back to this board. So I don't want to cut the conversation short in any way, but we see this as a kind of taster for the general conversation that will follow. But by all means, Andrew Foster and Andrew George have signalled. So Andrew Foster, you first, please.
Well, I just think this is superb, the amount of energy that is going into this and the huge range of activities that are taking place. So I really commend the team that are doing all this. I think this will make a huge difference to the morale of the organisation, the motivation of the organisation, the reputation of the organisation, and it fits really well with the board's commitment to make HE into the best place to work. So this is all very hugely positive stuff, and I look forward to a more extended conversation about this at the People Committee next month. I have one question, and it might have been a misunderstanding, but Lee, at the beginning of your presentation there, you talked about not so much you said we did, but we said we did. I would have thought we'd be wanting both, but did I misunderstand what you said then?
No, you didn't, Andrew, and it was a long debate we had about, obviously traditionally these things have been colleagues or staff say what they want to happen and then management will take on the responsibility of making it happen, and that was the you said we did traditional way of doing this. But as we looked at the sheer number of people involved in this from across the directorate and across the organisation, it occurred to us that it wasn't like that. It was actually collectively we'd come up with this decision. Everybody in the organisation had the ability to take part in the We Are HE workshops, and now collectively, I mean, dozens and dozens of people across the directorates are now delivering the work that we said we needed to do to make the best place to work. So we went down the we said we did route, and we're trying to make it a collective. Happy to have a debate about whether that was the right decision or not, but that's where we got to in the end.
Well, so just to come on the back on that, I mean, I think it's absolutely right to put that emphasis on the we said we did, but I think there is a value too for encouraging people to come up with their own thoughts and ideas and then giving them that encouragement that they will be picked up and implemented. So as I say, I don't see it as an either or, it's a both and.
Yeah, no, a really powerful point, Andrew. We've got all the Andrews, so Andrew Morris.
Thanks, David. So I just wanted to commend the little piece on ask, listen and act. Too often, senior teams do the ask and listen bit, but not to act. And I would hope that the People Committee would be focusing on the act bit of what commitments the senior team and other teams within the organisation make. And that closes the loop on this. So all too often, you know, organisations miss out on the acting bit, which you know, distances the senior team from the grassroots of you know, staff. So just to focus on that point, really. But brilliant piece of work, really good, fantastic.
Thank you, Andrew, and a really important point. Andrew George.
Andrew the third here, yes. I think very much commend. If anything, I would say almost overly ambitious. There seems to be so many projects going on, but obviously you've got a handle on that one, so that's just a comment. So mine's an open question. especially as we as NEDs get more involved in region. So Lee, on the thermostat between, is HE the best place to go, or is my HE office in Greater Wallop the best place to be? Where is that? Where is that thermostat? Because that's something that's going to be important as we go out and make connections with the regions, or even locally. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I mean, that's really important. One of the big issues we've got through both We Are HE surveys so far, and I think we'll be testing again in the current one, is this: where do you sit in the organisation in terms of regional versus national, or regional and national, and the relationship between those two groups. We have the ability, whilst remaining anonymous in the way the surveys are carried out, to do a bit of analysis of the issues raised depending on where you work in the organisation, either by directorate or region. And what we discovered in both so far is actually the issues raised are pretty consistent depending on wherever you work. That there's not one bit of the organisation that stands out in terms of having a particularly worse issue around some areas than others. I mean, there are nuances, but there's nothing that stands out that makes you think actually there's a major problem in one bit of the organisation compared to the other. So we'll carry on doing that analysis, and obviously we're doing the annual staff survey as well. And we, as I say, we recently did a pulse survey of people taking part in our webinar last week. We basically asked people 2 questions. One is, how are you feeling in yourself outside of work in the current climate? And secondly, how do you feel about the way we're working? I did it with my directorate just before Christmas. About 200 people took part in that one, and there's about 550 took part in the one last week. What it shows is that people, in terms of how they're feeling, are feeling a little bit less good about the world this year than they were at the end of last year, which doesn't come as a huge surprise. And if you look at the stuff done more broadly on polling, that's reflected across the country. So that shouldn't come as a huge surprise. But interestingly, on the way of working numbers, consistently since we started talking about this in March, April of last year, the numbers are in the high 70% in terms of people who consider this to be the way they want to carry on working. So the number last week was 77% in terms of people saying, marking themselves out on 4 and 5 out of a 5-point scale in terms of wanting to carry on working in this sort of way. And again, there was no discernible difference. So we'll carry on monitoring it. Hopefully the operational delivery group will help us solve some of the 1HE issues. But we're not seeing, as I say, huge differences depending on where you work in the issues covered by Best Place to Work.
Okay, Lee, thank you. Important work, and the People Committee will, I'm sure, spend more time than we have this morning on this, and we can feedback. But I think what you've probably got a sense of from Andrew, the first, second and third, I don't know whether the Battenbergs, but anyway, or Mountbattens, but what we've got from them is a real sense of positive feedback from the non-executive directors, and I think Liz Mears has echoed that in the comment column as well. So well done to you and the team for taking this forward. Now, look, it's 10:21. We've got till 11, I think, if you want a break before the Good Governance Institute's work at 11:15. And I think we need that break to just stretch legs, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is ask Callum, in presenting the finance report now, to do this very briefly. It's quite a simple, straightforward report. It shouldn't detain us, and we've got a decision to make about environments as a board, which we need to do. And actually, the planning should be a pretty perfunctory report as well. So what I'm going to suggest is we spend the majority of this next 40 minutes on the COVID response and the nursing response, because of the pressing nature of the issues that Navina and Mark and the team have been dealing with, in particular around nursing. So if I hope that steer meets with people's approval, just so we can we can get through this. So if it does, Callum, can I invite you to just get us through the finance report with some speed, please? Thank you.
Yes, Sir David, of course. So this is an important report, as it reflects the new academic year and the impact that's having, and of course the progression of COVID as well on the service. The key messages, just to quickly summarise, are that we have growing underspend developing, and it all links back to primarily undergraduate clinical placement activity that is not happening at the levels we would expect as a result of COVID. You'll see actually postgraduate medical costs actually start to increase in the second half of the year or in the months to go to the end of the year. So that's slightly offsetting that, and that's because of the success we've had in growing GP numbers. So that's increasing costs there, but that is more than offset by the reduction in placement activity and also the direct commissions we make as a result of COVID. So happy to take questions around that. We're certainly looking at ways of trying to mitigate those blocks as far as we can. A key development is that for the last 3 months of the year, we're making a commitment to fund simulated placement activity where it is can compensate for direct placement activity. We'll fund that at the standard tariff rate. So that's an incentive to try and enable as much activity to happen as possible, and some other things we're looking at as well to try and do that. But undoubtedly, as the forecast shows, I would expect that underspend to grow. Having seen the draft month 9 results, I think that will grow further because of COVID. We all know what's happening in the service. It's very difficult to train, and obviously we have the announcement about third year as trainees being released to service as well. So that number will go up. So there was one thing which isn't actually specifically listed on here. We in the past we have set ourselves a target of trying to meet a budget within 1%. Meet our budget within 1%. I think we're going to be quite tight on that this year as a result of this, particularly in the case of the placement activity that's going to happen over the next few months. So happy to take questions around that. We put in some other details around other COVID savings. They are, in terms of how we operate, they are relatively minor. There's certainly some costs that are coming out. There's some extra costs going in, particularly around IT. And I think it's worth noting that some of the major infrastructure costs in terms of admin, i.e. our buildings, those costs for now remain the same, but we will need to think about those into the future. So I think those are probably the key points that I want to make, but very happy to take questions.
Thanks, Callum. Soraya, please.
Callum, just very quickly, thank you for that. Are we sharing what's happening around simulation between the organisations? Because I know that is seen to be a real positive in terms of both assessment, but also actually helping trainees on their journey, the undergraduates progress. And it's just about different settings actually sharing what others are doing and actually enhancing that.
Thank you. Do you want me to take that now, David?
Yeah, please.
So our commissioners network around the country actively meet and share knowledge. However, I think there probably is a bit of a limit on exactly how much of that we can do, because obviously some of this will probably be regarded as intellectual property of some of the universities who are essentially driving some of that. So there's a bit of a balance to be struck, but absolutely, yeah, we're really keen to try and get the more activity that can be done via simulation, so that we don't have to catch it up in the future, the better. I should have mentioned in my initial piece that obviously the counter to this is that we are going to, this is unfortunately underspend this year, almost certainly means more costs next year. And that's going to be a real challenge for us. So we need to keep an eye on that, and that will be both in the undergraduate clinical, where we're seeing underspends, but we will also see it in the postgraduate medical. The financial mechanisms work differently there because we have to keep paying the salaries and the placements continue, but it's quite likely a lot of trainees won't have achieved the competencies and so forth that we would normally have expected them to, and that will incur extra costs for future years. So apologies, that was a bonus.
I was going to come back on that point. Right, there's lots of people showing, so I'm going to invite people to make the points, and then if you could just do that briefly. I'll then go to planning for 21-22, because you've almost made the bridge to that report, Callum, by what you've just said in terms of the key issue from this underspend is what it means for next year. This year's effectively gone. You and your staff continue to hold the financial discipline about the way we account, for which I think you should take an awful lot of credit. I think it'd be dead easy just to say this is all too difficult, let's just let it go, and you've not done that, so well done. But what it does mean is we need to be clear about what the knock-on implications are for 21-22, and these implications need to play through. Pages 8, 9 and 10, for instance, you've identified what some of the longer term implications are. And what I would ask is that we're really clear that these feed into the development of our 21-22 budget. And of course, they'll have to feed into the conversations about the spending review and the trilateral conversations that you're having with DH and NHS England and NHS Improvement. But let me go. Patrick Mitchell, Andrew the third. I'm not sure whether you're an old hand or a new hand at the minute, but I'll go to Patrick, and then some people had their hands showing. I don't mean to cut people off from making the points, but Patrick first, and then Liz, were you signalling? But anyway, go on, Patrick first.
Put the hand down to David because you covered it.
Oh, okay. All right,
Thank you, David. I was just going to add to Sarai's point about simulation in terms of we've now got active simulation networks in all of our 7 regions. They are growing and do a lot more sharing locally. And that probably makes more sense because they have a better understanding of their own sim environments and what can be used. The second piece is the postgraduate deans are very active now and have associate deans working on simulation to make sure that the tools that are available are being used, particularly for our junior doctors and dentists. And the third point is that, particularly for paramedics, we're doing a piece of work now to try and coordinate paramedic clinical placement sim activity, so that for the fact that the paramedics are being taken out of ambulances, we can try and catch up by putting as much activity through the simulation piece. The final bit is we're about to make a large investment in simulation proprietary tools, again to support craft specialties, particularly surgery and anaesthesia, catch up on competency sign-off for their ARCP through using some of the simulation that's now available.
Really interesting, Patrick. I wonder, will you give some thought to whether we could actually just expose some of those innovations to the board, maybe in a board workshop? But when I visited the universities, I've been impressed by some of the simulations, and this is technology that's developing all the time. And as it becomes much more embedded in the way that students are being educated and trained, it might help for us to just be immersed in some of those techniques and technologies as they come along. Certainly, I'd be interested. One of the consequences of not being able to get out and about is we're not keeping up to date on some of these technologies, or I feel I'm not keeping up to date. And I don't know whether it might be possible just to immerse us in something for 45 minutes, an hour.
I'd be happy to do that and perhaps link it to the Task and Finish group work we've been doing on behalf of the Minister on blended learning, because we've now got all the health regulators working with us on how far we can push, in particular, clinical placement time through simulation, which is clearly going to be a game changer in terms of how we work in the future.
Come back to us on that then, Patrick, if you will. There's a number of people nodding when I was making that comment and nodding to your proposal. So let's take that up. John Latham, please.
Yeah, Callum, it's just a thing to think about. But obviously, my university also is looking at simulation and responding to the opportunities to do simulation provision in terms of placements and everything else. I am having to pay out money now, which I basically will use over the life of any placements and anything that we put in place. So, and this is in your financial year now. It might be that the universities are willing to take the current profile of payments they might get. So in other words, over the next 12 months, but actually they'll have spent the money now. And if it's helpful for them to claim it off you now, that would help with this year's underspend and relieve some of the cost into next year. Because realistically, we are spending money now. So there would
really
be
helpful.
Just a thought.
I'll just quickly respond. We have looking along those lines. We promise we need to make sure that we can procure it and deal with it within the financial year, and that is that we have a problem there. So because we're so close to year end now, but we are looking at that now. We're particularly looking at there's some specific areas. I think dentistry. There's some possibilities, but it is going to be tough. So happy to take that one offline with you, John, if you like.
Yeah, fine. Just an idea.
Okay, thanks. Are we content to move on from the finance report? Can we jump then to the business planning report, which is item 10? And I think the key paragraph in this is towards the end of the report, which actually sets out the timetable by which we'll bring the business plan back. So you can see from that reports back to the February meeting, and at the minute we're planning, subject to those trilateral discussions concluding, to a March HEE board to agree the final business plan for the year, so we can start 21-22 with a business plan. And that was the point that Navina was making in her report when she presented on the discussions around SR. But Lee, Navina, is there anything you want to embellish to what I've just said, or does that stand in terms of the progress on the report?
So Lee, I think, do we have one slide to share, and it might stimulate the discussion? We will just take it that colleagues have all read the paper, but this might help to.
Yes, we do. Thanks for that, Navina.
Pop up now, Navina.
Yeah. So as David said, the process bit is hopefully self-explanatory, and you'll have seen it in the paper. I just want to give a bit more context about where we think we'll be when we have the conversation next month, in terms of what we think is going to be in the business plan, and the conversation is still being had. Navina mentioned in her report that we're currently having very positive conversations with regards to a whole number of issues around the spending review with NHS England, NHS Improvement, and the department. This gives a bit more detail about how we expect some of that to play out through the report, through the business plan. So the context within which we're doing this work this year is the election. Obviously, there's some manifesto pledges, the ongoing impact of COVID-19, the single year spending review, as well as the general work we always do at this stage around our investment in education and training and ongoing programs across a number of professions. What we do know, which is the public domain, is that we've got 260 million in the spending review, which gives us an overall budget of around 4.3 billion. And then there are a whole number of areas where we're talking, as Navina said, to INE and then DHSC around some extra monies to support other bits of priority for the NHS. Where we think that will shake out, and we're still doing work on this as been discussed, is that the core activity around investment in medical undergraduates, medical graduates, postgraduates, and nursing and AHP students outlined in our normal business, which is the vast majority of our spend, will continue. The manifesto money around 50,000 nurses and 50 million appointments in primary care. There's a bit of rehashing of timelines and that sort of thing that will be necessary for this year, but we're pretty confident that within that context we'll be in the right place. We'll put that in our business plan, and there are some costs around our priorities in mental health and diagnostics and cancer from the long-term plan that we'll be looking to make sure that working with partners that we're confident we can deliver those in 21-22 as well. And all of that is based on future investment to make those work in oncoming spending reviews, which we're already talking to turning our gaze on in terms of planning. There are still some major issues being talked about, like CPD, education training reform, how we spend our workforce development money and how much is in that pot. I'm still part of the ongoing conversations with INE and DHSC. And as Callum mentioned in the finance report, we know there'll be COVID catch-up costs. We don't know the quantum of those yet because they keep changing. Just the decision, which we can talk about in a minute, around nursing students will impact on those catch-up costs next year. But there is an agreement that they will need to be managed collectively by us and partners next year for us to deliver our business plan and deliver a balanced budget. And that's the context in which we're having the conversation around the business plan that, as the paper said, we'll bring back in draft form to discuss next month, and then in a plan to the board in March. Hope that's helpful.
No, very helpful, and that's a good slide, I think, just to capture what's agreed, what's being discussed, and what is yet to be agreed. So thank you for that. Andrew George, please.
Thank you for that, Lee. And I guess my plea is that we, as soon as possible, meld this together with the key business questions and KPIs. And, you know, the sooner we start getting those in rather than doing this and then deciding them. I know David will be thinking about this already, but really laying these in early so that these two processes are joined up, and some of the paper that we saw at the last board meeting ties together with this would be helpful, but I'm sure you're doing that.
Yeah, really important point, Andrew, and it's why we need to keep broadly to this timescale, I think, to begin to land some of these things. But thank you for that. Thanks, Lee, for the presentation. Callum, for all your work with Navina, these trilaterals as well, hugely important. It is worth saying, isn't it, that compared to previous years, the fact that there are conversations going on which are trilateral conversations involving DH, NHSI, E and HEE is just such a significant advance on what has happened in previous years. So, you know, a really big congratulations to the executive team for actually progressing this issue in such a collaborative way. I think it's absolutely essential, and I'm sure I speak for all non-executive directors in giving our full support for that as a way of actually doing business. So well done so far. But as we can see, there's still a fair bit to be done. So if we could just close that item down, and we're going to get this in February and in March as we work this way, as this works its way through to conclusion and then decision. Nicola, can I just loop back to the finance report, Callum? Can I just confirm that we've made the decision for the environments that are there? I'm not sure I summarised adequately. That's my fault as chair, not summarising. But can I just invite the non-executive directors in particular to agree to the environments that were in Callum's report on finance? I didn't positively do that, but if we could just move for a positive decision, please. Will somebody thumbs up? Thank John Latham. Other non-executive director colleagues, if you can nod at me or signal in some way, that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you very much, colleagues. Okay, so Nicola, that should give the minute that we need for the decision, and Callum, that should give you the formal confirmation of the decision you were looking for. Mark, if I can now jump back to you for the remaining 20 minutes or so on nursing. The floor is yours, Mark. I don't know whether you're going to do this with Navina, but I'll leave it to you two to work out how you present this bit.
Of course, Sir David, and thanks, colleagues. Yeah, I'll be leading this with Navina, and other colleagues will kind of jump in on this. So board colleagues will note in the board pack a briefing paper in relation to a very fast-moving both operational policy and regulatory piece that we've been working on with a number of arm's length bodies and agencies across the health education system in relation to the decision to support our third-year student nursing colleagues to be part of the pandemic response. I think the paper takes us through some of the initial important background to the policy requirements back in the first wave of the pandemic, which helpfully sets out some of the issues and challenges that were faced in the first wave, and also importantly the key roles that arm's length bodies undertook. And the paper also highlights obviously the nature of the change in the pandemic across England, and obviously the trigger for this obviously was the Chief Medical Officer's report to place us on a level 5 footing as a NHS and social care system. And from that, a request through to the Secretary of State for the NMC to reintroduce the emergency standards. As Health Education England with Navina, we've been working with DHSE, DFE, NHS England, Council of Deans, and a range of other stakeholders, including our trade union colleagues, and importantly, the voice of the student leaders. We've met regularly with student leader colleagues and also engaged with students as a result of this decision. And importantly, as the paper outlines, some divergence in some cases in relation to the policy of students within practice within the devolved administrations. Of course, the NMC is a UK-wide regulator, but we actively engage with devolved administrations, particularly important because obviously, particularly near some of the boundaries between different countries, some of our students do transfer across the two areas, which is important to understand the implications of this. What the paper sets out is the NMC Council instituted a regulatory change in relation to the reintroduction of the emergency standards, which placed the ability for the system to use the emergency standards both flexibly and in the needs of the NHS and service and also the university to allow students to move into a paid placement, which obviously offers then the significant opportunity for those colleagues to be part of support into services, does enact a process of paid employment, because obviously this does remove for these students into paid placements the supernumerary status, but they obviously do remain supervised within practice. But of course, what also the paper highlights is that there were a number of very detailed assessments and risk assessments in relation to the impact, not just on the whole cohort of student nurses, but other students, importantly. And the paper highlights areas such as allied health professionals, midwifery students, and also importantly, year 1 and 2 students. And the paper articulates some of the assessment and rationale for the decision-making process in terms of that. I'll finish just in terms of the next steps and the process that HEE will be following, linked in with NHS England colleagues and also importantly other organisations in the kind of management of this. But it is important to say that we are focused on support to the service, but also importantly our role as Health Education England in support of our universities and also our students. So it's safe and effective support into practice. So we've been working 24/7, and I'm grateful for Liz and James in my team who have taken on a huge amount of this in managing the complexity, working with NHS employers around contracting arrangements with the Department of Health in nailing down some of the policy detail, and also importantly working directly into the system through our regional nurses and also NHS England's regional nurses to make sure that we are making rapid and quick assessment in terms of the support of students into clinical practice. I think it's important to say at this stage we have had quite significant and very positive engagement from the university sector. Deans have been incredible. They have worked with us and their student bodies to understand the implications for them as an institution, but also directly linked into our NHS provider system to make a decision to support students going into practice. And we met with them yesterday, and we meet with the unions daily, as well as also the deans, to get a very clear sense check on the progress. And importantly, supporting those students with the complexity of this decision-making process for them as individuals and the implications for their onward career support and trajectory, as well as also importantly the support into the NHS services. And as Navina and I are very clear, as HEE, we will do all in our power to support the needs of the NHS during this time. We will work to make sure that we maximise the number of students who are able to attend on paid placement, but also importantly, where we can, because obviously the pandemic is different across the country, to ensure that we can provide continuity to existing placement arrangements and provide supernumerary support to students. Now, it is of course a very, very difficult time across the NHS, but it is very varied in terms of its impact. So we understand that those decisions need to be looked at locally between the universities, ourselves, NHS England and the NHS providers, to make sure that we're doing the right thing for both the service and students in those sorts of environments. But as the paper indicates, there are a number of things in play at the moment that we are currently working on in that, and I'm very happy to take any detailed questions on this. And I'm sure Navina would like to comment, has been actively engaged in support of me in this policy change.
Thank you, Mark. And can I just say thank you to you and echo your thanks to Liz and James of your team for everything that you've done on this. Sometimes it's a statement that comes easily that people have been working under pressure, but the reality is there's been a significant amount of pressure, and I'm not that long out of full-time work to realise just how intense that can be at times. So a big thank you and well done to you for that. Navina, do you want to come in now, or do you want the last word on this?
I only want to say one thing. I think
no, of course.
About the whole team and how important it is for us in HEE to hold on to our role in the whole system, which is slightly different from everybody else's, but it complements what everybody else brings. And I just want to say it's those three things. We have to balance what service and our population needs, but also remember we look after trainees, and remember that we do future workforce planning, and bring those three factors into the system. And I think we did that. There were some very tricky moments and tricky conversations, but it was really important to bring those into the picture and come up with this final sort of position that we're in at the moment. And I think it's partly because the relationships between us, NHSEI, the department, the NMC, we could draw on those strong relationships which were really important whilst things were really tough. It was a real test, I think, of those relationships.
Yeah, the test of relationships is when things are under pressure, and can you actually make the decisions and advance the agenda? And I think you've demonstrated you can do that. There's 4 people signalling that they want to speak. What I'll do, Mark, is I'll call them and then I'll invite you to respond at the end. But from my point of view, could you say a little bit about how you think this is going to affect the supply of graduates in the summer coming into the workforce? I'd like us to push beyond just today and just begin to open up the conversation. We might not be able to be definitive about that, but if from my point of view, if you could just do that, and then I'll call people in the way that you've signalled your hands in the participant list. So first was Soraya, please.
Thank you. And Mark and your team, and obviously Navina, etc. Amazing what you've achieved in such a short time to give clarity both to students and the trust. There's 2 aspects that I just would like either to be fleshed out today or as we go forward. One is around risk assessments for students and trainees, and that's very much around the safety. I mean, you pick up different things in the press about access to appropriate equipment, what happened in the first phase, the vaccination position at the moment. But the other big one at the moment is about emotional resilience. And if students, are going into areas that perhaps they're not, used to, how are we making sure that their voice will be heard? So will there be some form of confidential or some sort of link that they can have a safe space to be able to raise those issues and concerns? And absolutely, I know trusts will have this at the front of their mindset as well, and they'll make sure things are happening, but it's just overarching. How are we going to get some of that assurance?
Very good. Andrew Foster.
Yeah, well, as others have said, this sounds hugely well organised now compared to when we first discussed it as a board, at least, which was only about 10 days ago. So you know, my congratulations to everybody who's made that progress. I think the question I've got is quite similar to the one that David asked, which is about an exit strategy. If you could say a bit more about, you know, is the expectation that that's it for this academic year? That's the way it stays now? Or is there a way of return to normal if pressures begin to ease?
Okay, thanks, Andrew. John Latham.
Sorry, yeah, so this is both probably sitting with my audit committee hat on and also sort of generally. It's just about how we're recording the individual decisions that are being made by individual trusts and individual HEIs. So basically, there are a number of key elements of this. You know, they're allowing students to go in, they're not allowing students to go in, and everything else. If we could get literally a spreadsheet that basically says what decision was made by each trust and each HEI, so we've got a general picture of how it worked out, because we've got such disparity going on at the moment. When we look back in the rearview mirror of what the impact was on certain groups of students and how the HEI wherever responded, it would be good to have a very simple indication of how each different area has responded. Otherwise, we're doing great pieces of work, we're responding very quickly, we're responding very flexibly. We just might not have it all recorded in a very simple way for us to reflect.
Really interesting point. Harpreet.
Thank you, Sir David. And yeah, firstly, just to add my congratulations to the team for all the great work that's been done. I guess someone who has been, 6 months out training myself, I think one of the things that, and Soraya has touched upon this, has been on that, we cannot emphasize the importance of communication and getting this out to the students as well. I know during the first pandemic, the first wave, we were all trying to figure things out, but obviously having a better idea of this, just to make sure that we do get this out to students as much as possible, because many of them do often feel left in the dark or blinded with some of the decisions being made. So the more we can get out there, the better, and because often otherwise it just remains in our ecosystem rather than actually getting out to the end user, which in this case is our students and trainees. And what the plans for that would be really good.
Yeah, a good reminder, I think, Harpreet, that it's not about what we do in this boardroom, but about whether the 160,000 students actually have a sense of how they're being supported through this period of time. So thank you for that. Andrew George, please.
Thank you. So similar to previous Andrew, can't remember second or first, the exit strategy I think is really important. I mean, last time you ended up having Mark to do a lot of extra work because of the promises that were implicit. I mean, they weren't actually made, but the implicit promises that people felt were being reneged on or whatever. And so just checking that you're going to have that covered to save yourself in the future, and thinking as well about the difference between different disciplines. I mean, my guess is that at the moment mental health is under pressure, but isn't under the acute pressure, but is going to be under a chronic pressure. And so how do we deal with that diversity? So one university might be sending nurses into mental health at the moment and into the acute sector. And I guess also, and this is something that will probably cause you to laugh inside because you're probably spinning the plates too much to keep things going at the moment, but actually thinking about what are the lessons learned for the future, because actually some of what you're saying is how we should be behaving in the future. Not all of it, but there's actually some of it in terms of a more flexible, needs-based, how do we integrate needs of the service with the training, and some of the lessons learned, and how do we actually then make this into something positive for the next 2 or 3 years. Thank you.
Really good point, Andrew. Liz Mia.
Yeah, thanks, David. So really clear report. Thank you to Mark and the team. And my point was about the communications that have gone alongside this. So I've seen Mark's tweets last week, Navina's stakeholder briefing, and I think that's really set out how as HEE we're working with trainees, we're working with service. These are extraordinary times, and this is why we've had to make this decision. So I think that's been really good for the reputation of HEE and explaining very clearly why we've had to do this, which should stand us in good stead for the future.
Yeah, really very, very good point, Liz. Thank you. Navina.
Sorry, my point is really about how we bring how the board seeks assurance for us on this matter. and the risks and mitigations. I guess we're going to be talking about a board assurance framework, but actually there's more. It's likely that over the next 12 weeks or so, there's so whether we could just confirm at the end, so David, that this, whether we're going to bring briefings to the interim board meetings, how are we going to do it? I think it'd be helpful to just be clear.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
Well, don't let me close the meeting until we've come back to exactly that point. And this conversation is quite a remarkable segue into the board assurance framework conversation. This is a brilliant example of why a board exists and what it should be doing, and whether we're doing the right things in the right way that can inform the rest of our time together today. Can I just check whether Harpreet and Andrew George, yours are new or old hands? Do you want to come back? Both disappeared. Okay. Sorry, I hope that doesn't embarrass anybody when I do that. But Mark, the floor is yours. Last word on this to you, and I'll just come back and try and respond to Navina.
Brilliant. Thanks, David, and thanks, colleagues. Really, really helpful questions. I'm really glad to see that, kind of our thinking is aligned here. So I hope I'm going to chunk them up into kind of 3 distinct answers here, which is, firstly, I'm going to start with the kind of question primarily around the recovery, which is, we are in the in-flight phase now, where absolutely we're supporting individual students and individual universities to go out into the system to support that. But we are also in parallel looking at the recovery phasing of this, because these students are third years. We already took quite a significant backlog of hours into their final third year of a degree, and the second years who were first year have had very limited experience. So that there's a material difference between this group of students now at this point in the academic cycle compared to last year. So there is a risk profile materially different going into this. So the recovery phasing is quite critical. We are doing this in January, February, which is slightly further in the year when we did this last time. So there is a requirement for the students to go back into university at some point to either complete academic assessments as well as also complete some of the hours, which obviously this process will do. But there is a material risk that some students will be delayed from graduating, and we are working to try and mitigate that number down by working with individual universities. And I know Hazel in Callum's team, we are rerunning the lost hour survey again, just to materially understand what this means for students, because obviously that then feeds into discussions we have across the Department of Health and Social Care and the DFE, because obviously this interrelates with the impact of universities themselves. So those meetings are already set up. We are doing those this week and into next week. So we are already looking at the risks and the recovery requirements, both at institution level and at individual student level. But I think at this stage, it's clear that some students will be delayed in graduating and entering the workforce. So we need to try and reduce that down as much as possible. There will be some regional variation in that, of course, because we have different approaches in terms of the delivery phasing of this. So we will bring back a detailed assessment and reports to board, as Navina said. We've got a very granular reporting approach, John. So I am doing with the team, we are doing a very urgent assessment, which will be ready tomorrow, based at institution level in terms of the approach that they will be taking against the different year groups. So we can kind of use that as an operational marker of where we are, but behind that then sits a more detailed assessment down to individual student level, because this is a choice and we need to be able to track that effectively to ensure that that feeds up to our board assurance, but also importantly any of the conversations that we need to have with other agencies about both risk profile, financial risk, as well as also academic risk and individual risk to do that. One of the disruption is already apparent in the system because these students have already had a disrupted year. So, the pastoral care is really quite mission critical. And that plays to Soraya's point, which is that we're actively engaging with the Council of Deans and their membership, and they are absolutely full cognizant of the disruption and the impact for students. And there are 2 elements to that. We conducted a very detailed survey back in the first wave, which we are going to be publishing the results with a very detailed action plan of the efforts and things that need to happen. both at university level as well as also importantly within the provider. So we will be working to. Sorry, I've got loads of feedback. My bit. So what we'll be working to do is to make sure that all of those elements are in place, both at university level for support and understanding, and also importantly at the provider placement level. We have set up a shared council for students, which is a really broad range of students who will be working and giving us feedback on the ground. And on a simple level, I have a WhatsApp group of all of the senior student leaders, and we regularly converse on issues and challenges. So I get a regular update and feel from where these students are in practice, and that's been really helpful. I'm very grateful for the student leaders for doing that. And also importantly is getting the message out, is communicate. And one thing I learned from the first wave is get the messages out consistently to the people who matter. And this is a real challenge I had in the wave one, which is the adult learners, the students themselves need to get information to make their own choices, but also importantly, the universities to help them in that choice. And that is a really difficult decision. Do I send it to the universities first to give them heads up to help the planning process, or do I send it to the students first, or do I send it to both? And we're still working through that, but I think it is about the students, which is the challenge. A letter will go from myself and the CNO today to individual students. Liz has done a phenomenal piece of work rapidly on the new student guide, which will go up on our website later today. And I have 2 webinars this week, live webinars, one tonight with the unions to talk about student experiences and also the issues in this next wave thing, and then with the NMC colleagues later on in the week. So we will push every channel we possibly can to support getting information and clarity out to people we can. So I hope that's kind of given people assurance on that element in play. The risk assessment bit is something really critical. We've been very clear, Soraya, that the universities have a clear role to ensure under the NMC regulations that when they send their students into practice, a risk assessment is completed at institutional level and at individual student level, because there will be lots of variations on the theme. But there is enough flexibility in the placement arrangements to allow a student, and this is a real practical example, may not wish to go to an intensive care unit, but could go and work in occupational health or public health in a vaccination centre where there is a potentially a lower risk. So we are working at that granular level at local settings to make sure that we can cover off most of our eventualities, because the main aim is to ensure that students get paid placement opportunities so they can get their hours and complete on time, and those who don't still get some level of experience, knowing that it's not easy out there at the moment to deliver placements in any of our settings, to try and keep that pipeline going, because what we don't want to do is create such a bow wave of potential risk in terms of graduation during the summer, because I know that the NHS and social care system are going to need these high quality and expert graduates out on practice. But and my final point is we really do need to be cognizant that the experiences of our NHS staff will be mirrored and reflected in our student population. They will not be immune to some of the challenges and kind of harrowing experiences in some cases they may have been exposed to. So this is not something just to do for today. We're going to have to look after these students for many years, either through their programme or when they come into NHS, because these things have will appear at later points. I hope that's been kind of helpful. I'm happy to take further questions.
You're not having any further questions because we're going to move on, and you need to draw breath, I think, Mark. That was excellent. John Latham.
Sorry, yes, it's just a very quick one. Just Mark, I'm sure you're aware of this, but OFS have written to universities warning them about not doing CMA compliance, and indicating that one of the expectations is that if students are not going to finish their academic year, that the university should extend the academic year, so giving them the chance to actually complete courses and graduate this year. At no extra funding, of course, from government to enable them to do this, but it is seen as an expectation within the letter. If you want me to send you the letter from OFS, it is a public letter that was sent. Quite happy to share that with you if it helps with your conversations.
Yeah, thanks, John. I do have further meetings with officials through later on in the week, including with the DFE. So I'll learn more about some of those policy implications from DFE in due course.
Okay.
Thanks, John. Again, really helpful that you've got that sort of intelligence feeding into our work, and so thank you for that. I'm going to draw this bit to a close. The question was, how, as a board, should we continue to engage with this? And we've been having those board briefings on a Friday at 4 o'clock for, we try to keep to the discipline of an hour. And I don't know, I personally have found those very helpful because of the regularity and the frequency and the timeliness of the briefings that come through. And they provide, I think, the opportunity for non-executives to both support and challenge the work that is being taken forward. We bring items, as we are doing today, to this board meeting, and in addition to your report, Mark, we've got the notes of the meeting on this agenda item as well, which are part of our record. I don't know, John, whether there is a role for our audit and risk committee here, but certainly I think the opportunity of maintaining those board briefings on a Friday evening is something that I think we should take. People are nodding at me at that point. So I think that's the way the board continues to engage and contribute to this. And again, you know, I'm sure other board members, along with myself, will make themselves available at any notice, basically, if there are issues that you would want us to become involved in for any reason whatsoever. So. But listen, exceptional times called for exceptional measures. They also call for quite exceptional leadership. So thank you to you and your team, Mark, for providing that as we go forward. And just the sheer energy and collaboration and emotional intelligence you bring into developing those relationships and working with people. I personally find deeply impressive, so thank you for that. I'm going to draw the meeting to a close, if I may. I've not been notified of any other business. Oh, Nicola, go on.
Before you draw to a close, Chair, I noticed that we jumped straight over the board agenda planner. It is as written, but it's there in the papers. It was early on the agenda. I did just want to notify members that there have been, since we published papers, a few additions for February, so expect to see some changes more in the developmental session, looking at workforce planning and the business plan item that Lee spoke about earlier.
Thank you, Nicola. Sorry, again, not great on my part to have missed it, and it is important, so thank you for drawing us back to that. With that, I'm going to close the meeting. The time in the bottom right hand of my screen says it's 11:10. I think we plan to have 15 minutes break.